Hey, what is up guys, it's Thunderstruck115. I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Just full of positivity and happiness, dude! Because today we are going to be responding to the Actman's video on arena shooters. Now, I'm willing to bet that most of you know who the Actman is at this point, so I'm not going to waste much time introducing him. And I generally like his content and his channel, but I think this one was kind of a miss. Then again, it has been like about a year and a half since he last took an L, so I think he's due for another one. But anyways, let's get right into this shit.
It's easy to forget the humble beginnings of FPS given how massive the game industry has become, but ever since man created gun, we have enjoyed shooting things, mostly alive things. Wolfenstein 3D is credited as being the first FPS title anybody really cared about, the first Avatar, if you will. But id Software didn't invent the concept. If you think about it, first-person shooters were merely an evolution of arcade and space shooters. Just a change in perspective.
Yeah, but the change in perspective is like the defining trait of a first-person shooter. Well, that and the shooting, obviously. I mean, hell, 2 out of the 3 words of the genre are dedicated to the perspective.
And battle royales are merely the evolution of arena shooters, and now extraction BRs are the hot thing, and so on and so forth. About a week ago, I told a buddy of mine I was working on a video about the rise and fall of arena shooters, and he looked at me and he was like, I don't even know what those are. And I guess that's the point. That's how far out of relevance they've fallen.
So because some random motherfucker that you asked doesn't know what an arena shooter is means the entire genre is just dead? What the fuck kind of logic is that? Also, unless your friend just doesn't really follow gaming that closely, I highly doubt that he doesn't know of any arena shooters, especially considering that, you know, Doom Eternal is a thing.
But lately it seems nobody really cares. At least not about their multiplayer. Single player, yeah, Doom Eternal's kicked ass. But like, why does an 11-year-old game like CSGO continue to dominate Steam charts while a game fresh off the press like Quake Champions can barely scratch 4 digits? Is there no mass market appeal for these so-called boomer shooters? Well, there still is, but as we'll see later on in this video, studios didn't quite figure out how to make these games appeal to that broader audience. You might have played Doom 2016's multiplayer and thought, well, that felt antiquated. I feel like a 40-year-old man still clinging to his childhood playing this.
On the contrary, I thought Doom 2016's multiplayer wasn't antiquated enough. Like, that was the whole problem with Doom 2016's multiplayer. It didn't feel like an arena shooter. While the campaign stuck to its arena shooter roots, the multiplayer did not. You had a 2-weapon limit. There really wasn't that much to scavenge on the battlefield except when the occasional BFG or demon power-up spawned in like every so often, which didn't happen a lot. Hell, the game literally has a loadout system that feels like it was ripped from Call of Duty. And what it ended up being was a game that didn't really feel like an arena shooter, but felt more like a clone of COD and Halo. And while I generally had fun with Doom 2016's multiplayer, at the end of the day, I would much rather play COD or Halo. The reason people stopped playing Doom 2016's multiplayer wasn't that arena shooters are bad, it's because Doom 2016's multiplayer could hardly be considered an arena shooter.
They ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Perhaps you bought into the craze of Lawbreakers, and later tried to hide your shame about that. Though developers have tried to revitalize the arena shooter genre, it seems none have really been successful.
Oh, you know, none have been successful besides, you know, Wolfenstein: The New Order, Proteus, Dusk, Ultra Kill, Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus, Doom 2016, Doom Eternal. Like, the arena shooter isn't dead. I suppose you could make the argument that maybe during, like, the 7th generation of consoles that it kinda was, but ever since 2013, they've made a comeback. And considering that games like Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal have hit the mainstream, there is certainly a demand for these. Now, I definitely wouldn't say it's as high as more arcade-style shooters like Halo and COD, but just because something doesn't have the reach of those games doesn't mean it's dead.
And since Lawbreakers, it appears
no one has dared try.
But why? Well, that's the big question of the day. Before we tackle the fall, we have to take a trip back to witness the rise.
Alright, at this point he starts going over the earlier days of arena shooters. I don't really have much to say regarding it, so I'm just gonna speed past it so we're not here all day.
Essentially brought FPS games to consoles.
Because apparently the numerous ports of Doom, Wolfenstein, and Duke Nukem to consoles don't exist, I guess.
But why weren't shooters popular on console prior to GoldenEye? Well, if you could, would you really want to play this with this? Yeah, no, didn't think so. Arena shooters were simply too fast and chaotic to be played on controller, and the N64 controller was already a mutated monster to begin with, like GoldenEye just barely worked with this thing. Again, at this point, arena shooters were the only type of shooter. It's like you were moving fast, of course you were. But this entire stigma that FPS titles couldn't work on console changed with GoldenEye, because Rareware actually stopped for a second and said, hey, does the player need to go fast? Turns out no. In fact, who would have thought slowing down movement and forcing players to make methodical decisions in combat could even be more interesting? You know, there might be something to that style of gameplay.
So wait, you're really gonna claim that GoldenEye forces you to make more decisions in gameplay than something like Doom or Quake? Doom and Quake have a wide variety of enemy types that force you to really think about how to engage them and what weapons to use. GoldenEye just has you fighting a bunch of random dudes with guns. Not really much more decision making other than shoot them till they die. Okay, well, decision-making isn't completely absent from GoldenEye, but it's certainly nowhere near the levels of Doom or Quake.
GoldenEye didn't have an online multiplayer, so again, it didn't directly affect the popularity of Quake or other arena shooters, but couch co-op and local play became a thing, and GoldenEye planted a very important seed, one that would eventually sprout and grow to overthrow the arena shooter craze. But before that would happen, id Software saw the success of GoldenEye and was like, oh yeah, Rare, well played. But we can do that too. Yo, Midway, go make Doom 64 for the kiddies.
Ooh, it looks like you were completely wrong about that one, Act-Man. It seems like Doom 64 released 5 months before GoldenEye did. Oh, and I guess we can add that to the list of first-person shooters that released on console before GoldenEye. Like, did you even do an ounce of research before you hit record?
Now, some debate has been had over whether Halo is an arena shooter or not. Well, I think it's much more similar to this older genre of game than something like Call of Duty. Anyone who's played Quake or Doom will tell you, fuck no, Halo isn't an arena shooter. Movement is much slower, you can only carry 2 weapons, not to mention melee and grenades weren't treated as their own weapons on a dial, regenerating health, etc.
Alright, I want everyone to keep this clip in mind. Act-Man is saying that Halo isn't an arena shooter. Now, I know whether Halo has been an arena shooter or not is a point that has been debated for a while, but personally, I agree with Act-Man that it isn't, as the only thing it really has in common is scavenging weapons from the battlefield and, in the case of the multiplayer, the even spawns. But pretty much everything else doesn't really fall under the category of arena shooter. But the reason I'm asking y'all to remember this is because it's going to be very important when he talks about a few other games.
2004 is the year that arena shooters started to fall, and the success of games like Halo 2, Call of Duty, and many others were only partially to blame. For a time, the only way to access the internet and partake in online gaming was on PC. Xbox Live made it far easier and accessible without the need for an elaborate setup. A fourth grader in the 1990s is not going to be able to figure out how to set up a PC to play Doom online, but a fourth grade kid in 2004 has a much better chance of figuring out Xbox Live.
No, a kid is probably not going to be able to set up either of those things, and is instead likely to be set up by their parents. Whether they're setting up Xbox Live on the family Xbox, or setting up online for Quake on the family computer.
Does that make sense? Arena shooters had been growing stubborn and stagnant. It had been 11 years since Doom released, and aside from many visual upgrades, there hadn't been much that changed.
But if you look at arena shooters nowadays, they have changed. They were able to adapt, and therefore they have been able to be successful. You know, kind of like Wolfenstein The New Order, Wolfenstein The New Colossus, Ultra Doom 2016, Doom Eternal.
Unable to settle on a direction for a sequel to Duke Nukem 3D, The Return of the King would come much too late to revive the genre, as Duke Nukem Forever would be trapped in development hell for over a decade. After its release, arena shooters might have been more dead than they were prior.
So because one shitty game in the genre got released, that means the entire genre is dead? Well shit, I guess by that logic, the survival horror genre is dead because Doom 3 sucked. I mean, hell, 3 years later, we would get Wolfenstein The New Order, an arena shooter that was really successful.
Unreal Tournament had presence on Xbox Live, but wouldn't see similar levels of success on the 360, and it paled in comparison to the might of Halo 2 and Battlefront. Doom, not content with becoming irrelevant and being unable to live up to a legacy of changing video games forever, instead opted to change directions completely. With Doom 3, id Software decided to pursue a more story-driven action horror kind of game, drifting from its roots.
Yeah, and Doom 3 fucking sucked. What's your point?
But still receiving critical acclaim. Well, how the turntables. Instead of Half-Life copying Doom, now it's the other way around. Not to mention Counter-Strike had seen a major update with CS Source, and Call of Duty was starting its run of success as World War II shooters were becoming more mainstream. Add on to this the rise of Battlefield, Battlefront, and other massive FPS titles, and the once mighty pie that arena shooters alone used to feast on was being consumed by many others.
Yeah, because those other kinds of shooters that were previously swimming in this primordial soup were finally able to come into their own. Whether they be story-driven games like Half-Life 2, survival horror games like System Shock, or something more arcadey like Halo and later Call of Duty. Because now there were different kinds of shooters competing with the arena shooters, whereas they previously stood mostly unopposed.
Timesplitters, Future Perfect, Unreal Tournament, these may have been the last bastions for the genre on console. But after this, FPS titles had grown so far from their original iteration, and they weren't looking back. The release of COD 4 and Halo 3 pretty much sealed the fate of arena shooters and denied their future relevance in gaming. If you weren't willing to adapt, you weren't going to succeed. They had slower movement, regenerating health, a 2-weapon inventory. These things were antithetical to the core of arena shooters. And as developers and players started to favor the trends set by Halo 3 and COD 4, the trends set by Quake, Unreal, and Doom were quickly being forgotten. Modern military and World War II shooters had firmly taken over. After this generation of consoles, new arena shooters were few and far between, and those that did release, well, I can't really think of any on the Xbox 360.
Okay, now I'll admit, during the Xbox 360 generation, new arena shooters were definitely few and far between, but once the Xbox One and PS4 generation kicked off, then arena shooters really started to come back and showed that they were certainly alive and well.
I guess that's the point, huh? FPS titles were now more about personal accomplishment, easily shared user-generated content, progression systems, social features, all things that most arena shooters failed to adapt to.
I find it funny how you say arena shooters didn't have those things when the original Doom from 1993 had literally everything you just mentioned with the exception of the progression system. Social features? Well, you had LAN parties, online multiplayer, co-op, user-generated content. The Doom modding scene is one of the most active out there, with plenty of different mods and PWODs available, such as BHAY, 1024 Claustrophobia, Gridlock 64, 10 Sector, Nova 2, among many, many others. And user accomplishments that you can share. Doom literally had a replay feature, which would record your game and allow it to be played back in-engine. And these files were so small that they could quickly be transferred even across the 90s shitty dial-up connection. It was so effective, in fact, that it pretty much was responsible for the birth of speedrunning culture, as people would compete to see how fast they could clear a level, and would show off their accomplishments on many bulletin boards.
And cooperative shooters like Left 4 Dead, Destiny, and Borderlands started cropping up, and now FPS had such a mainstream appeal. Call of Duty and Halo were much more new user friendly. It changed the demographic substantially, as filthy casuals like myself now found ourselves screeching into the void on Xbox Live. And if me as a 7th grader could play Halo 3 on my console, why would I hop to PC to play an arena shooter?
To have fun playing an arena shooter. What the fuck else do you want me to say? The experience of playing an arena shooter on PC like Quake or Unreal is vastly different than the experience of playing something like Halo on console. Like, even if you're in the group that does consider Halo an arena shooter, I think y'all would still agree that something like Quake and Unreal is something far different from Halo.
FPS titles were a lot more social and team-oriented now. Halo had vehicles, Call of Duty had trash talk in lobbies, it had zombies. Battlefield had squads, Counter-Strike had teamwork and coordination. And arena shooters were still just zipping and zooming around without a care in the world. You guys want to go fast again? Are we still popular? I hope so.
I mean, right there, you gave a reason for people to play arena shooters that they might not get in other types of shooters. Like in something like Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, Battlefield, or Halo, can you zip and zoom around the battlefield like you can in an arena shooter? No. Kind of like how in an arena shooter you don't get the more tactical feel of something like Counter-Strike. These different kinds of shooters have different strengths to them and different reasons to want to play them. And then of course there's also things like the lack of a weapon limit, health not regenerating so you have to go find health packs, shit like that. And I find it funny how you think that that's not a reason to play an arena shooter, but you're gonna list the fucking trash talking in the lobbies in Call of Duty as a reason to play that. As if you can't also chat in arena shooters. And again, this is something that Doom from 1993 had. You hit the T key and it would bring up the chat, which is actually kind of annoying at times because I'd be in the middle of a firefight, hit it on accident, and then it's registering all my key presses as chat rather than actually moving, which is kind of fucking annoying when I'm trying to dodge a Revenant rocket or some shit, but you get my point.
Some of you Call of Duty veterans may remember a playlist in COD 4 called Old School. Most of you will have no idea what I'm talking about because less than 2 years after release, the playlist was one of the least populated and consistently sat under 1,000 players.
Well, no fucking shit.
Well, yeah, the main modes that people hop into in Call of Duty are Team Deathmatch, Free-for-All, Search and Destroy, and Domination. And I suppose in the newer games, maybe Kill Confirmed and Hardpoint. The other modes aren't as populated, because those aren't like the main modes that most people play Call of Duty for. Now, that's not to say that they don't play those other modes, but they're not as popular. Combine that with the fact that Call of Duty releases a new game on an annual basis, and no shit, after 2 years, some of the less popular side modes aren't gonna have as many people. I mean, have you tried hopping into Black Ops 4 to find a match of Control? Good fucking luck. Because 2 years after the release of COD 4, World at War was already out. Modern Warfare 2 was out, or if it wasn't, it was pretty damn close. A lot of the player base had moved on to those newer titles.
Old School mode was the arena shooter version of COD 4. But while Infinity Ward tried to pay homage, it was clear they were paying homage to a relic of the past. and this mode was abandoned in all future releases outside of COD 4 Remastered. So this begs the question, why didn't arena shooters stay relevant? It's not like just because there were other offerings that it made arena shooters objectively worse, right? So what happened? Horrible new player experience. Almost no one wants to fight FPS players with thousands of hours while they haven't played 5 hours yet. You can barely strafe without losing track of enemies while you get people rocket jumping and murdering you before you can even react.
If you can point and shoot, you can play Insurgency. If you've played Rising Storm for an hour, you can kill someone who's played for 1,000. Arena shooters, however, not only is there more complexity in moment-to-moment gameplay, but there's also a lot more punishment for failure. In Rising Storm, one death is a drop in the bucket, and loadouts keep your character consistently powerful. But in Quake, that death not only grants the enemy a point, it also means they're given the upper hand next time. You become a mouse who must slay the cat. Lower player counts in these games result in frequent occasions of less experienced players being pummeled with no room to grow, which itself creates a self-fulfilling prophecy.
If you think about even the most hardcore fighting games, a casual can pick up a controller, mash buttons, and sometimes win. The skill gap in arena shooters is just too polarizing for casual players to enjoy without becoming a hardcore player themselves.
This dude is literally taking a page out of Quantum TV's book, which, you know, that's never really a good sign of a mentally stable individual. But right here, he's expressing the same attitude that Quantum TV had towards Elden Ring, where he acted like just because the game was hard that he couldn't learn and that it therefore wasn't accessible. Which, no shit, when you first play a game, unless the game is pretty easy, you're gonna suck at it. But guess what? Just like how you can learn how to play Elden Ring better, you can learn these tricks in an arena shooter to get better at it. And as for people complaining about the casual experience, that's just online multiplayer games in general, not just arena shooters. Like in Halo Infinite, I've seen many people in the community bitch about how the Mangler is too overpowered, or in the more recent Call of Duty games, people complaining about slide canceling or some other shit. Wherever there's an online multiplayer game and an online community of people around that game, there's gonna be those kinds of people that are just gonna bitch about the game being unbalanced or whatever.
There's also far too many different subgenres of shooter to compete with nowadays that what worked in the 90s is looked at as antiquated. There's a stigma around it. Gamers want something more than bunny hopping around a static landscape for 10 minutes. They want to progress. They want a ranking system, things to unlock, a class to build, armor to customize. Hell, it wasn't even just the rise of other shooter genres. The rise of online gaming as a whole served to thwart the arena shooter monopoly.
That's a nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
Any evidence to support this? Also, I find it funny how you're gonna blame the rise in online multiplayer to be the downfall of arena shooters, when motherfucker, it was literally arena shooters like Quake and Unreal Tournament that popularized online multiplayer in the first place. You literally cannot make this shit up, folks.
But at the same time, you might be thinking, well, Act-Man, companies like id Software and Valve were still doing really well. Why couldn't they revive arena shooters?
They literally fucking did. Well, specifically, id Software did. Valve was just content to sit on their hands and let Steam make a fuck ton of money for them instead of risking developing new games. Until recently, that is. But id Software, in 2014, they released Wolfenstein: The New Order, an arena shooter for modern audiences. Well, to be fair, it also had a couple more elements on top of that, but it also had every other element of an arena shooter besides maybe the fast movement.
Well, id Software and Valve sat in similar positions after the success of Doom 3 and Half-Life 2. They had too much dignity to milk their franchises and create anything less than a stellar, revolutionary new entry.
I call complete bullshit on that, given that Doom 3 exists.
And so both franchises went dormant for years. Epic Games was developing a new arena shooter back in 2014, but completely switched focus to work on this upcoming third-person shooter. How long would Epic Games have been in business if they hadn't abandoned Unreal Tournament for Fortnite? Duke Nukem Forever, like I said, had no fucking direction whatsoever. That was just a pure disaster. And Quake 3 was a big hit, but it took like 9 years for a sequel to come out. And by that point, Halo 2 and Xbox Live were blasting off into space. And the next Half-Life game would be a VR title released 500 million years after Half-Life 2. But what about Doom 2016? That had an arena shooter multiplayer, and you're right, it was okay, but it also like really sucked ass. Like playing as demons in multiplayer and killing other players, that's what was cool about Doom 2016's multiplayer, and almost everything else kind of sucked ass. Especially all these unforgivable dances. The multiplayer of Doom 2016 felt like it was checking a box, as 98% of the effort went towards the single player.
Okay, number one, Doom 2016's multiplayer is not an arena shooter. The campaign certainly is, but not the multiplayer. Now, again, I said earlier that I didn't think Halo was an arena shooter, but I could see the arguments for it being one. Well, that's because the two biggest requirements of an arena shooter are met there. Those being even spawns and scavenging weapons on the battlefield. I feel like those are the two most important qualifiers for an arena shooter as far as the multiplayer goes, but guess what? Doom 2016 completely fails in one and kinda fails in the other. Even spawns are not a thing because it uses a loadout-based system very similar to Call of Duty, which has its own progression system, which by default means that there are no even spawns. As for scavenging weapons on the battlefield, I mean, occasionally a BFG 9000 would spawn in, and of course you also had the demon power-up orbs, but that was it. Compare this to something like Quake, where there's a bunch of powerful weapons littering the battlefield and you gotta go scavenge them to get a better chance at defeating your opponents. And another thing, most arena shooters prioritize the single player over the multiplayer. In most cases, the multiplayer for these arena shooters were an afterthought. And pretty much the only arena shooters that were best known for their multiplayer component were Unreal Tournament and possibly Halo, again, if you consider that an arena shooter, which I don't. But every other arena shooter was more well known for its single player, which is why most modern arena shooters focus more on the single player than they do on the multiplayer. Hell, games like Wolfenstein: The New Order, Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus, Ultra Kill, and Proteus are single player only, because that's what the majority of arena shooter players play the games for. Now, this isn't all of them, obviously. There are plenty of people who enjoy the multiplayer of those games. Nor do I think there's anything wrong with enjoying them more for the multiplayer. But that's just the reality of the situation here.
Though all the franchises and studios that had pioneered arena shooters were either fucking up or doing something completely different. Bethesda and id Software did revive Doom, but as an experience of being an ultra badass blasting demons. And with its sequel Eternal, they ditched the entire concept of arena multiplayer entirely in favor of making this one mode that I played 3 times and never touched again. So if Doom couldn't revitalize the arena shooter genre, who could? Nobody.
What? Doom 2016 was widely successful, and Doom Eternal was even more successful. They quite literally revitalized the arena shooter genre. Well, okay, I guess technically Wolfenstein: The New Order kinda did that, but Doom 2016 and Eternal were far more mainstream.
Certainly not fucking lawbreakers. If you check the player count of the arena shooter genre on Steam, it's barely a fraction of what CSGO pulls in, and player count alone doesn't matter. You can still play these games and they are still very much alive.
Then what was the point bringing up the player counts to use as an argument then?
But they're not nearly as important or relevant. Splitgate might be the best example of a comeback, but that comeback was short-lived and its player base has evaporated since. Anyone who's played Quake or Doom will tell you, fuck no, Halo isn't an arena shooter.
See why I told y'all to remember that clip? Earlier, he labeled Halo as not being an arena shooter, but now he's labeling Splitgate as being an arena shooter, when Splitgate is literally just Halo, but with portals. Now, again, I know there are some people who will say Halo is an arena shooter, and if those people are also calling Splitgate an arena shooter, that's perfectly fine. The problem is that Actman here is contradicting himself. Like, why is Halo not an arena shooter, but Splitgate is? Either both should be classified as an arena shooter, or neither of them should be. But either way, you should at least make sure you are able to
keep that same energy.
Though the studio is working on a sequel, The reason Splitgate even saw this level of success as a pure arena shooter was due to its incredible portal gimmick, and movement and aiming was much more accessible to newcomers. This was adapting to trends. It seems the best way of bringing back arena shooters was through fun, easy to understand movement tech like grappling hooks. And what do you know? This feature has been universally praised and beloved in Doom Eternal, Halo Infinite, and Titanfall 2.
Okay, number 1, Titanfall 2 is not an arena shooter, but number 2, now he's listing Halo Infinite as an example of an arena shooter with a fun gimmick, when earlier he said he didn't think Halo was an arena shooter. Once again, Actman, I'm gonna have to ask you to
keep that same energy.
Arena shooters simply didn't adapt in a way that could attract a new audience, so they were left with their dwindling old boomers. They were too stubborn, adhering to the things that made them popular, like rocket jumping, and newcomers didn't feel compelled to master all the nuances of these games and their movement just to get 2 kills. This is why we saw trends of offering rewards to bad players, with things like death streaks in Modern Warfare 2, ordnance drops in Halo 4, Titans in Titanfall. Everybody gets a Titan, no matter how poorly you do.
I love how you're gonna name things that have not stuck around for very long. Like, as far as I know, death streaks in Call of Duty were only in Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3. Ordnance drops were in Halo 4, but they did not return in Halo 5 or Halo Infinite. And as for Titans in Titanfall 2, well, to be fair, we haven't gotten a new Titanfall game since Titanfall 2, so I guess we'll have to see on that one.
Developers realized that the casual audience shouldn't be neglected. They introduced a lot of elements of randomness. Anyone can grab the Thanos glove in Fortnite and become a badass.
I mean, Fortnite is a battle royale. One of the major things about most battle royales is the random spawn of loot.
Anyone can hit the Smash Ball in Smash Bros.
Why are we talking about Smash when the video is literally about first-person shooters? This example makes absolutely no sense in this context because Smash is a fighting game, not a shooter.
And unleash a devastating attack. Not to mention, if people were going to master a video game, they'd rather master aspects like positioning, aim, strategy, what weapons I go for.
And you can literally master all of those skills in an arena shooter. Like, literally, every single one that you just mentioned.
These aspects you see in games like Rainbow Six and Counter-Strike. The reason Call of Duty has never given up its extremely short time to kill is because that's what attracts the casual audience. This is one of the fundamental differences between modern shooters that are successful and why arena shooters have fallen out of favor. So what happened to arena shooters? Gatekeeping happened. Quakers want you to follow jank written guides on how to perform basic movement because things like bunny hopping and rocket jumping aren't explained in the games, and never had intuitive control systems implemented that made those actions easier. Shooting at a blur darting across a CRT monitor with a ball mouse while compensating for 200 millisecond lag isn't very engaging for hours either. And by the time technology caught up with the genre, taste in multiplayer had long changed. In short, the movement of games like Quake are what made arena shooters great, but it's also what made it impossible to grow because it was inaccessible to newcomers.
Yeah, I'm just gonna copy my response from earlier because I really don't feel like saying all this shit again. This dude is literally taking a page out of Quantum TV's book, which, you know, that's never really a good sign of a mentally stable individual. But right here, he's expressing the same attitude that Quantum TV had towards Elden Ring, where he acted like just because the game was hard that he couldn't learn and that it therefore wasn't accessible. Which, no shit, when you first play a game, unless the game is pretty easy, you're gonna suck at it. But guess what? Just like how you can learn how to play Elden Ring better, you can learn these tricks in an arena shooter to get better at it. And as for people complaining about the casual experience, that's just online multiplayer games in general, not just arena shooters. Like in Halo Infinite, I've seen many people in the community bitch about how the Mangler is too overpowered, or in the more recent Call of Duty games, people complaining about slide canceling or some other shit. Wherever there's an online multiplayer game and an online community of people around that game, there's gonna be those kinds of people that are just gonna bitch about the game being unbalanced or whatever.
By the time the Xbox One and PS4 generations launched, arena shooters had all but fallen out of memory, and any new attempts at reviving the genre hardly made a splash.
Oh, you know, besides Wolfenstein the New Rodius, Wolfenstein 2 the New Colossus,
Ultra
Doom
Kill,
2016, Doom Eternal.
The games felt outdated. primitive. Even when you look at Doom 2016, it looks like it's from the early 2000s.
Is this motherfucker Blindbeard the Pirate? Because I defy you to name one game from the early 2000s that looks anywhere near as good as Doom 2016.
Each new release that failed to garner a significant audience only made it harder for the next one to try. And at a certain point, they just stopped trying. I hope you have enjoyed this trip back into history, examining the intricacies of the FPS genre and arena shooters. And I am kind of sad that they've fallen out of favor. There have been some indie games that perform moderately well, and a lot of these arena shooters are still playable with very small but dedicated player bases. Like, you could still play the original Half-Life's multiplayer if you really want to. It's actually quite fun. But it's clear that interest in this genre has never been lower, and even Quake Champions seems unable to break into the mainstream. Still, we owe a lot to these ancient classics, but their reign as king has ended. So I hope you've come to understand how and why this genre died out. It wasn't instant, but slow. It's a case of stubborn pride and a change in trends. Still, when I listen to the metal as fuck soundtrack of Quake 2, I feel this urge to go fast and jump around. I feel like maybe there's hope, but to be honest, I'm not sure if there's an arena shooter that could interest me at this point. Whatever chance there might have been for arena shooters to make a comeback and return, it most likely died with Doom Eternal. But if anyone can bring back the intense, fast-paced action of arena shooters and revive the genre, it's gonna be Doom.
I mean, it literally fucking did. Doom 2016 came swinging back with a vengeance, bringing back the arena shooter genre into the mainstream, and this was only furthered by Doom Eternal, which was even more mainstream. Alright, at this point, the Actman just has his outro left, so I think I'm gonna end off the video here. So I guess the key takeaway here is that Actman thinks arena shooters are dead because he's being completely oblivious to a lot of arena shooters that have come out within, like, the last 5 to 10 years. And yeah, while I like the Actman and I like his content, this video was a fat fucking L on his part. But anyways, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe for more, and tell me what you think about the Actman being a clown for once. Also, I'm not sure if my video will be out in time for this to be relevant, but if you're watching this before 8 PM Eastern Time on April 5th, 2023, then you still have a little bit of time to join in my Everspace 2 giveaway. I'll have the relevant community post linked in the description, but anyways, that's about it. Peace!